Welcome to episode 209 of the CUInsight Experience. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com.
And I'm Jill Nowacki, founder, president, and CEO of Humanidei.
This episode is brought to you by Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions compete with challenger banks and digital wallets. Alacrity delivers seamless real-time money movement experiences for loan payments, A2A transfers, digital distributions, and bill pay with a single cloud-native platform that connects the clearinghouse, Fedwire, ACH, and FedNow. Credit unions can modernize without overhauling legacy infrastructure. Learn more at alacrity.com.
Yeah, thanks to Alacrity. And now it's time for the content of today's podcast, where we're talking about the inner work of leadership, how personal growth shapes the way that we show up for our teams, our organizations, and ourselves.
Because leading others starts with leading ourselves. Emotional intelligence, self-reflection, values, these are the foundations for impactful, human-centered leadership.
And to help us dig deeper into all of this, we're thrilled to welcome back a familiar voice today. Tracie Kenyon is my teammate at Humanidei, and she brings thoughtful perspective and years of experience helping leaders grow from the inside out.
We'll be exploring what inner work has shaped in our leadership the most.
How do we stay grounded and clear when the pressure is on?
And how can leaders create space for themselves and their teams so we can keep evolving?
All right, Tracie, we are so glad you're here with us today, and welcome back to the podcast. This is a throwback to episode 12. Did you know that that's
episode
how early
12.
you were on?
Yeah. It was 2019. What's new? No.
I was a child back then, you guys.
To kick things off today, Tracie, chat with us a little bit. You think back about your own leadership journey, and I know you just had a big milestone in the credit union industry as well in your career. But as you think back to that journey over those years of experience, what's one piece of inner work that really you think is what's made the biggest difference for you?
First of all, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Jill. It's good to be with you. It's good to see you. I know no one else can see you, but I can see you.
So we get to see each other.
For me, I have to say that it's been a combination of things, starting probably with executive coaching. Not me being an executive coach, but me engaging an executive coach. And I had the pleasure of working with someone for about 12 years. And it was really mind shifting, energy shifting, and also attitude shifting for me. And it set me on a journey to learn a little bit more about executive coaching and also about presence and leadership.
So I have to throw this out there in the very beginning. If anybody's looking for executive coaches, there's two of them on this podcast today, and I am not one of them. So don't reach out to me. I've got nothing good to share. But I'd like to ask both of you to kind of take a step back on that. Like, what does inner work mean? Or mean to you, but just mean in general as two people that work with so many professionals around our industry on leadership development. How about just a brief explanation of what we're talking about?
I'll go ahead and start, and then you can round it out. But because this inner work term is one that I don't hear it a lot. We kind of used it today to just really encapsulate this, but it's not something that's coming up in my sort of regular dialect in the conversation that I'm doing. But I think about kind of what we're talking about today. And it's this idea that inner work is really the getting real with yourself. So there's professional development work that might help you with public speaking or interview skills or executive development. And that's all personal development. But to me, that's not really the inner work. That inner work is the stuff like knowing your values, like knowing what you stand for, being really clear on your interactions and maybe the impact of how you're showing up on others, kind of that self-awareness side of it. I think that's part of what I would lump in there. Tracie, I don't know that I really hear you talk about inner work much either. So as far as that actual term, so when you saw it come over across your inbox and they, hey, can you jump on and talk with us about this? What were some of the first things that came to your mind?
Certainly self-awareness. I think that
was the first for me too.
Right. Yeah. I think the other thing is really learning to lean into your authentic self. And in order to do that, you have to know who you are. You have to really know what you stand for. You have to know what drives you, what makes you tick, what motivates you. And so, Jilly, just like you said, knowing your values, being able to articulate that, being able to use that as a litmus test for decisions that you make, and then digging deeper. There's always more. You just got to keep digging. And for some people, that's coaching work. I'm also a big fan of counseling or therapy work if that's necessary. And frankly, I always think it's necessary. So I just think, they work hand in glove. And then really digging into some assessments. And there are a lot of great assessments. I'll put a plug in for Humanidei, if that's okay with you guys. We do Harrison.
It was me.
Brandon's like, whatever. I've got two of you now today to deal with. But, we do Harrison assessments and DISC assessments. We do EQ or emotional intelligence assessments. And those really help people to have a better understanding of who they are, how they show up, how others perceive them. And once you have that knowledge, then you can really start to do something with it. So that idea of inner, and I have to tell you, the world works in really interesting ways, doesn't it? You all sent me this email and said the case for inner work in leadership. And I was like, that's interesting. And I was just speaking to a good friend of mine who is a coach. We sort of coach each other monthly. And she's going through some work right now. And the work is called Inner Size. And the book is Inner Size, INNERCISE. So I just ordered it. I don't know anything about it yet, but you can bet it's on its way.
We will link to that too in the show notes for sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Tracie, I was curious, and I was kind of thinking about this earlier today as I was thinking about this podcast, and you opened the door for it. So I feel like I can cross-exam, but the concept of therapy versus coaching. And I know when I did some leadership coaching with Leo Ardeen, another former guest on the podcast and a credit union family member, when he was going through some of his executive coaching certifications. And the first thing he said to me in our first session together was, this is coaching, not therapy. And I appreciate and respect that. And I know that sometimes when I'm on the flip side of that as a coach, I get a little nervous that we're crossing lines because I'm like, whoa, I am not certified to be a counselor, a therapist, a psychoanalyst on that. So how do you detect, first of all, when it's like, this is probably more therapy than it is coaching? And if you've ever been in that situation, what would you do or what could you do to kind of redirect that? And flip side of that, if you're the client, and you think, I need a little something right now, how might a client decide whether coaching or therapy is the better path for them?
Or both.
Yes. Right?
You did say both earlier.
I'm
a firm believer in both also.
Right? Yeah. I'm a yes and girl all day long. So one of the first things that I do with a new client is to actually talk about the differences in coaching from three other helping modalities that we talk about frequently: consulting, mentoring, and counseling or therapy. And I'll just cut to the chase because I think your folks understand what each of them are. But the difference in coaching is that the coach is a thought partner. The coach does not come with solutions. The coach does not assume that they know more about the client or their life than the client does, or, than the partner does. And so there have been times where in my coaching journey that I've had clients tell me that they are in therapy and they will share their diagnosis. And my comment back is always, as long as you are fully compliant with the course of treatment that you're seeking, we're good. And I am not a therapist, though I do have an undergrad in psych. It does not make me, I didn't play one on TV. I'm not at all a therapist. And so what happens is when we cross into those other areas, what I try to do is I try to say, okay, I'm taking off my coaching hat and I'm going to mentor you a little bit here, or I'm going to consult with you a little bit here. I never take off my hat and say, I'm now going to be your therapist.
Right. No.
I'm absolutely not qualified. But if we get to that point and I get that sense that, okay, this is something deeper, and generally speaking, it's going to be some trauma, some kind of a really deep situation that has happened to them. And it's clear by body language, tone of voice, what they're actually saying, that they still have more than just big feelings around it. They might have some big actions that could be happening as a result of that. And that would be a point where I would say, it might be a good idea for you to talk to a licensed therapist.
So one of the things that I think I've learned over the years, usually it tends to be the hard way with me, is that like nothing is one and done, right? We're not going to read a book and be like, we've got it all figured out. We're not going to go to a coaching session and be like, oh, got it. Don't need you anymore. That next conference may be valuable. It's not going to fix everything. So it's that idea that it turns out curiosity is a good thing. And that idea of constantly that desire to grow, be better, do better. Notice I never said be perfect. That's not a thing. That's the question, I guess. Both of you have been CEOs and led organizations. Many of the listeners are either CEOs or want to be or leading organizations right now too. Is there something are there pieces of advice that either one of you would give for that person who's listening today on whether it's slow? I'm always a big fan of slowing down and taking the pause, right? And taking that inner look. Jill and I have talked often about that idea of like knowing yourself. You mentioned it very early on here too. Is there like that piece of advice that you would give somebody today who's like, well, I do this professional development. I do X, Y, and Z. I'm doing this for my credit union. But that really, I mean, from your own experience, what to do or what you think leaders should be doing to make sure that they're self-aware. They are being authentic. Because you can't be authentic if you don't know yourself. So
I'll just jump right in to this one. The things that you mentioned, Randy, are all important. And they're important: professional development, going to conferences, in as much importance as getting information, or probably more important, is the networking and the developing the human connection. That's really external work, though. And what we're talking about with coaching is internal work. It's really focused on me as a person and you as a people. It's really digging into some vulnerabilities. And so for that reason, I think there are people that maybe it sounds scary because, I have to actually talk about myself. I have to talk about, we can't have a conversation about ourselves without having some kind of discussion around, feelings. And so we have long talked or thought maybe that feelings don't belong in the workplace. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I mean, we're all just big bags of feelings. And I really believe that if we don't let that out, it's going to come out in some ugly places. And we've all seen it, right? And so that's probably what I would say. Yeah, keep doing the professional development work and do something that is really introspective.
So I'm going to build off of that question that Randy just asked. So, and I see that definitely where I talk to somebody and I say, oh, well, executive coaching might be an option. And they'll be like, oh, but I went to credit union management school, or I went through GE, or I did like all these things. And again, fantastic development stuff, but maybe not as personalized or as personal as one might wish to get with some inner work on that. This might be one of those scenarios where it's like, we all know it when we see it, but we don't necessarily know how to describe it or what to call it. But what are some signs that a leader might be avoiding that inner work, might be avoiding that getting real with their bags of feelings and their and that side of it there?
Well, the first one, big red truck, they're avoiding, right? I mean, there's that. I think some other things, some other signs would be if you're feeling burned out.
Now, that's one that's interesting how that comes out, right? Like, because it can come out as disconnect, but it can also come out as like all of a sudden you're being very controlling almost, right? There's only one way. I don't have time for anybody else's way, right? I mean.
Absolutely, Randy. Yeah. Yeah. And people should dig into that. They should, that's something where you're like, wait a minute, that's not my normal way right. of responding to this. What's going on? And so burnout, avoidance, you may be fortunate enough to work with someone who's honest with you, who says, hey, there's something not quite right with you. You're not acting the way that we're used to seeing you.
Probably couched in a really nice, like, how are you doing? Are you sure?
Right? Exactly. And we all need people like that in our lives. So, hopefully we have that. Those would be some of the really obvious signs. And quite frankly, like anything, we often don't make change until we feel some pain. I would love to say, there's a lot of research out there that there are two main motivators, love and pain. It'd be great to think that we actually make changes because we love ourselves and because we love our organization or wherever you want to put that L word. But most of the time, and I will say I have some clients who do come for that very reason. They're like, I know I'm at a good place and I want to get better. That's awesome. Most people are coming from some kind of a pain point or a friction point. And so then there's some work around that before we can get to the really kind of looking at what's going on.
Randy, do you have anything to add from that? I mean, I feel like you're kind of able to take a pass right now and be like, oh, well, I'm not the expert.
I'm not the coach.
Your thoughts matter here too. And certainly as a team member, as a leader yourself, what kind of observations do you have? Either personal reflections, if you're willing to share them, or things when you've seen colleagues or other folks or me at home. There's trends when it is kind of that, you might want to spend a little more time on the inner work here.
I thought it was so interesting what Tracie just said about that. Normally it comes at a pain point, right? Yeah. Like where we start to look inward. And I find that extremely interesting. And I'll tell a story about myself that it's still a head scratcher so many years later. Like I have been a big journaler and all of that type of stuff. We got into the pandemic and I didn't journal for a year. So the time that you would have thought that I should have been journaling more than ever, because knowing how healthy that was for me, was the time that I broke like a 5-year streak of journaling and didn't journal for a long time. And I remember thinking, so what you were saying, I remember thinking about that afterwards. And I thought about it from like a leadership perspective as well. And going back, like sometimes as the CEO, as the leader of an organization, we can create that bubble around ourselves. And like kind of insulate, whether it's intentional or not. And I've found, at least, and like that's what journaling does for me, is that it's like it allows me to kind of cut through the noise and I can ask myself the questions like that I'm feeling, hearing, seeing. Is it true? Is this just comfortable? Is it whatever? But that slowing down and that reflection allows me to think more clearly and see if I'm right, wrong, going down the wrong path, doing things that don't fit me. And I guess that would be one of the things that I've seen over and over again. I've seen it many times in my journey where somebody's like, I'm so busy, I'm so whatever. And then you're like, well, then why are you doing this? And they're like, well, I enjoy that. And it's like, but it doesn't, what? Then that's not part of busy then. So I think that to me, there's this reflection point of truly looking inward and making sure what you're doing is right and you're doing it for the right reasons and it fits what you want to do. I mean, one thing, and this might not fit in anywhere, but I was laughing kind of for a second earlier to myself, but like when both of you were league presidents, I spoke at both of your like annual conventions at one point.
Right.
I hate public speaking. But there was a point, and I think it was in the same year or right around the same year that I spoke at both of your conventions. I'm not good at it. I'm not comfortable at it. I don't enjoy it. But I thought it was something I had to do. Turns out I love hosting a podcast.
Interesting.
But I do not like speaking on a stage. And like from that point forward, I've been asked many times to speak at different events. And I say, no, thanks. I don't mind doing a panel or host. I'd prefer to host a panel than actually be on the panel. I mean, like those type of things. But it's that idea of why was I saying yes for so long? And a conversation Jill and I have had a lot over the years is like, okay, we've done this. We've said yes to it. We still have to fulfill our commitments because we believe in that. But do we stop saying yes? Or do we say no? Or do we redefine what we are that fits with us more? And so to me, that, like, when I think of leadership, when I think of like the leaders who listen to this podcast, all the conversations that we've had is like, okay, you might have got yourself into something, but we have the ability to also get out of it. And hopefully, I make the joke all the time. I'm a person who touches the stove twice. The first time I was like, it's probably a fluke. But like, hopefully after this first or second touch where we can make those changes. And if we don't, then we're kind of looking in the wrong places as far as I'm concerned. So sorry, just a tangent. But when I think of the inner work, it's something that I think about a lot, actually. So.
And you hit upon some really important themes. Learning to say no, learning to boundaries. Many people struggle, especially leaders. Of course, I'm a niche coach or niche coach, whichever way we want to say it. But I work with people in the credit union space. That's where I'm comfortable.
We all do, right?
That's
yep.
my world. And I believe that we attract a really unique type of person into leadership. And we attract people who want to be around people and who want to develop people as a general rule. And so those types of people oftentimes just keep collecting and collecting and collecting. And I have used the analogy of a Christmas tree. So if I'm offensive, if there's someone that doesn't celebrate the Christmas holiday, I'm sure you've seen a Christmas tree. And the concept of the tree is that ornaments get hung on them. Well, if you just keep hanging lights and ornaments and tinsel, eventually that tree's going to fall over. At some point, the leader needs to let go of and needs to say no and set some boundaries around how their tree is going to get decorated.
I have a question for both of you on this one, and I think it ties right into that. Is you mentioned the people that and there's a reason that we all love being in credit unions and have chose to do so for decades. And I think a big part of that is the people behind it and the mission driven. When people are getting away from themselves, whether it was in your roles as league presidents or now that you're coaching and developing leaders, have you seen where they kind of get away from the mission and it becomes about maybe it becomes about the numbers? It's finance, where suddenly they're not being true to what made them want to be here. I think we've all seen people come into the space who didn't stay long because they didn't have the same value set. But have you noticed that in whether it's yourself or others, where it was like, oh, this is not why I'm here. I need to get back to my North Star, basically, right?
I think there's a big risk of that when stressors enter the environment. So, maybe you're really committed to building a certain type of culture, but then for whatever reason, there's unexpected turnover or the cost of talent is you can't get the talent you were hoping to in a recruitment process. And so you had this vision of the type of team you would build. And because of disruption to the workforce, you don't really have that. And now you've got people and it's kind of like, well, I know I said we wanted this kind of balance, but just power through and get it all done. Or I'll just pick up all the extra slack. And now I'm working 70 hours a week or something. And we'll do that fun, warm, fuzzy stuff later. But right now we got to get the job done. Similarly, I think there's that risk when we say, okay, we want to serve this population or serve this demographic or, provide products and services in this way. And I think there's a real risk of it right now. I can't point to anybody who I'm like, oh, this is a problem. But we say we're here to help the underserved. We as credit unions want to make sure we're making affordable credit available to people who can afford the credit. Like we want to make affordable credit available. And then we stand here and we say, oh gosh, we might be looking down an economic downturn. And one thing we know that happens is if the economy slows a bit, then delinquency picks up a bit. And our boards aren't really comfortable with delinquencies. So we better tighten up those underwriting standards. Now, I will say credit unions are known for keeping credit moving in times of recessions when other financial institutions might not be. But I still think that would be a great example of a time when, well, yeah, I know we wanted to get into C&D paper lending right now, but maybe we should put the brakes on it. And I think the challenge that comes with that is for a leader who is really motivated by purpose, if they start to feel pressures on the margin, that can be quite demoralizing in like where it's I'm here because I want to serve, but at the end of the day, the financials are the master of me. I want to serve the people. I don't want to serve the numbers, maybe.
But if let's just say you are that leader, right? And Tracie, maybe I'll go to you with this one. Like this idea that if you're that leader and your team suddenly sees you make that switch, like where's the confidence in you as a leader? Even though you're not living maybe your best, your truest self, right? Like at that moment, as a leader of an organization, they have to be looking at you and going, I thought we stood for something until it wasn't convenient. You can see the downside here, I think.
Absolutely. And that's a real problem for a lot of leaders, but really it becomes a problem then for their followers. You're not a leader unless people are going to follow you. So that at that point, you may become more of a figurehead because you're not really leading people. And that's a culture killer. And remember that, Jill mentioned that I just hit a milestone, 40 years in the credit union space.
Wow.
And
congratulations.
Thank you. And one of the things that I remember way, way back, from my very first job, is that our motto is people helping people. So, and everything old is new again, all of this stuff. It's really easy sometimes to think, man, that old stuff, sure. But it really, that isn't our DNA. And so as leaders, when we start to drift away from mission, when we start to live incongruently with our culture and our own values, people feel that and they see it. And that creates, it creates chaos, really. It creates discomfort. And then you have people that just don't know which Barbie is going to show up, if you know what I mean. You look at all the different varieties of Barbie or Ken doll, whatever you want to say. If you can't know that with confidence that the Barbie that I'm used to seeing, that is really disconcerting for people. And we lose good talent because of that.
That made me think of like using the credit union, like you said, it may sound old, but it's still the truth. The people helping people, using that credit union mission as kind of a North Star in a way, right? When we're leading through that, we are all here to serve humanity. Dropping the name. No, in a different way, with a Y, but so anyways.
Then I guess the follow-up question on that is, and I think, gosh, I'd like to meet the person who's never felt like they've floundered or had that moment of disconnect with their...
I don't think you'd like to meet that person.
It's like the Dalai Lama or something, maybe. I don't know. I'd be jealous. But that...
I don't think that'd be the word.
That cognizance, though, about... So I think it's a part of the human condition to go through these moments where you end up thinking, gosh, I'm disconnected. I'm not truly in touch with my values. I'm not truly in touch with my inner self right now in this moment. And I think people who have a really good command of their self-awareness and their emotional intelligence, they don't never have those moments of disconnect, but they might be able to notice like, oh, I need a little pause here. I need a little reset. So Randy, you mentioned journaling earlier as one thing you can kind of consistently go back to, but what other practices or experiences do you think are really beneficial in helping if you are starting to feel like you're slipping out of that purpose as a leader? What's the way to get back to it?
Well, I can share that for the last several years, 3+ years, I have practiced what's called positive intelligence. And there's a great book, Shahzad Shamin. And essentially it is, and Randy, you mentioned the hand on the hot stove. It is recognizing when the hand's on the stove because you're in some kind of a negative situation. This doesn't feel right to you. You know you're not where you should be. And it's learning to quickly identify that, quickly move it, because you get curious. That's actually one of my core values. You get empathetic with someone who's talking with you. You maybe think of them as a child because it may help you reframe that. You start to think like a cultural anthropologist where you think, I wonder what this would look like in 5 or 10 years. And so that's this work. It's pretty meaty, but I will tell you that it has helped me to really be able to stay in somebody called me last week, said, you're kind of like a monk. And I said, no, not really. I mean, I guess a monk that has a lot of energy. I don't know. But, what I find is that I don't dwell in a lot of that negativity. Does that mean that negative thoughts don't come? Oh, I can't swear on this, can I? Oh, of course they do.
Sure.
Heck, yes, they do. But
Why not?
it means learning to recognize quickly, categorize it, and do something with it, and not dwell in that. And so there's some meditation that goes along with that. It's very intentional. So you really have to commit time to it so that it then becomes a habit. Similar to, like you said, your journaling, right? You
Absolutely.
Time to it. It's become a habit.
But it gives that space also, right? I was looking it up. I wasn't trying to look away because I just recently listened to a book on Audible called Reconnected. And one of the things the guy recommended was like going for a walk and not listening to a book and not listening to music. And just, he's like, you still got your steps if you didn't bring your fitness tracker with you with the notifications on it. But it was that idea of being able to just go for a walk and let your mind, much like meditation or journaling, or I can't wait to read the book that you just mentioned. But yeah, we'll link to that one too.
No, I absolutely agree with that. And part of this work is getting into your body, getting out of your head and into your body. And it can be simple things like, rubbing your fingers together, or if you think about children, we all have been around children. Jillian and I are both mamas. So we've seen children grow up. We know that they have some kind of a soothing behavior. Some are more pleasing to watch than others, right? We know that. And as adults, we start to recognize that some are culturally acceptable. So rubbing your hands gently together is okay. People aren't going to, but if you're, maniacal about it, they're going to think you're a bad scientist, right? Or so it's learning that, but really by getting into your body, it gives your brain a pause. And so again, it's that intentional work of shifting enough, taking a pause, taking a breath, and then moving forward. And when we do that, we are then more in command.
Jill, I see you nodding over there and smiling.
Well, I'm laughing because when I have something like that I need to talk about and I'm taking a minute to get the messaging out, I have a tendency to tap my fingers a lot. Yep. And it's one that now we've been together 8 years now. So our communication's reached kind of a different level. But in the early days of Randy and I being together, that was a tell that I didn't know I had, that he was like, what do you need to talk to me about? And I'm like, oh. And so
that's when you're having the conversation in your own head. I can tell.
Who are you talking to? What's going on?
Might be out of 209 episodes, this might be the first episode that I really do wish was also video recorded. Because all three of us are we're making all okay. This is
yeah. We're wiggling around here. And I think, Randy, as a partner, you being intuitive, and that's again a partner is like, in some ways is like a leader, right? We take turns in healthy relationships in taking that role. But as leaders, we have to be intuitive or work on being intuitive. And we also have to be observant. So when we notice team members giving their telltales, right, dropping those breadcrumbs, it's our responsibility to check in and say, hey, is everything okay? What's going on? And that's what creates and accelerates trust in your relationship and also your culture.
One of Jill's things that I absolutely love that's based from her curiosity, whether it's as a leader or as a partner, is favorite question is, tell me more. And it's something that I've used on this podcast for 200 episodes. And a few times I was like, I stole this from Jill, but tell me more. And then I was like, I've said it enough.
I learned that one when Crosby was really little. So you both know, but for the listeners who don't, Crosby's dad and I got divorced when Crosby was 4, maybe. So he was really little. Today, he's almost 14 and he doesn't really remember when we all lived together. But there was a time probably when he was maybe 5 or so. So we were divorced, but it was still kind of new. And he says to me, well, Mom, I just wish we all lived in the same house still. And so the first instinct as a parent is to be like, oh my gosh, I've damaged my kid. Like, what's wrong? And learn from him because he's always been sort of a unique child in how he communicates and sort of how he deals with things that come up. And so I said, well, tell me more. Well, then you could cook me dinner and Dad could play with me instead of me having to. And it's like, okay, it's not because he's like, oh, I have a broken family. It's because he's like, I don't like it when you're in the kitchen and I want somebody on the floor doing Paw Patrol right now. And so it could be Dad, or it also could be the babysitter at that time. It's sort of that kind of concept on it. But I think what I learned from that type of conversation is that if somebody tells us, hey, I'm having a problem, and our first instinct is, oh, how can I fix this? How can I solve this for you? Instead of saying, tell me more about that. Let me get to the bottom of it. Because what I might think
because
is
my first instinct is to fix it. So I'm trying to get better at saying, tell me more.
and to understand it, like, because my mind might jump to, oh my gosh, and it might be something completely different. Oh, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Like if a team member tells me I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now because of my relationship with the team member being a work relationship, I'm immediately thinking, well, is it because of work? And then there's the risk of being potentially judgmental if it's like, well, you have a normal workload or you have and in fact, somebody might say, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. And you say, what's going on? And they're like, well, something about the economy or something about politics or something about my family. And it's like,
my mother-in-law just moved in yesterday.
Right. So any one of those things, I just want, your mom listens to this podcast. So I just wanted to be very clear that you said mother-in-law. I did not. And so yeah, I mean, that is an interesting, that idea of making sure, I guess, that we do our inner work, but then we don't project our inner work onto others because like, well, I know how I would feel. Perfect. Then you know how you would feel. You don't know how someone else might feel in that situation.
Exactly. And I love that question too, or that statement, tell me more, because it forces potentially some co-creation. And when we have that ability to work together for a solution, we get much better buy-in, because rather than when you tell Crosby, or in my world, if I would tell Kylie, who's now an adult. She had her 50th birthday.
You can even rent a car.
I know, can't believe it. But if I would tell her to do something, sometimes there would be pushback. But if we would have a conversation around kind of, again, you get to a little bit of that why, what does it mean for her? And the same thing with our employees. And again, I'm not in any way saying that they are children. It's that we have relationships, and relationships are relationships. So recognizing that what we bring, when we work on ourselves, we become better and stronger in every aspect of our life. It's a great gift.
This is one of these episodes where it just could keep going on. This is just a blast and it's so much fun. I'm absolutely loving it, but we do have to wrap it up because I'm watching the little timer here. So with that, I will just say that since you've been on the last time, since Jill and I have been doing this year, we always try to give like that one takeaway. So I'm going to throw it to Jill to give her one takeaway when you think of the whole arc of this conversation today. And Tracie, I'll go second so you can have time to think about it since we're springing it on you. But Jill, what's that as we wrap this thing up, which this seems abrupt because we could just keep talking. I mean, we may turn it off and y'all can be jealous that we're still going on. But anyways, we do have to respect people's time. So what's your takeaway from this conversation today?
My takeaway today is that doing the inner work means knowing your values, your purpose, your mission, your why, however you want to characterize that, knowing those values that center you and consistently returning to them as you move forward. So I think if you can be clear on your values, you'll be able to be true to yourself in that inner work that needs to be done. So my key takeaway is if you haven't done it yet, clarify what those personal values are of yours. Don't just come up with the words like, oh, it's family and love, but really think about what are those values? How do you behavioralize them so you know when you're living those values, acting in those values, and what are obstacles or items that might get in the way of your values, and how do you make sure to stay centered in the values? So I think that's my key takeaway, is really that importance of the first step in self-awareness is knowing that thing that matters most to you. I think in my lexicon, the idea of personal values is what it is that will center you.
I'm going to come back to curiosity, because I like this idea that leaders are supposed to know everything is just not realistic or true. So the idea of being a curious person and the idea of constantly trying to learn and figure out yourself more and be your best one today. That's all we can be. And I think that allows us as leaders to show up more authentic for our teams, to be more consistent with our teams and our organizations, and that understanding that we all have room to grow. And I would throw this out there to anybody out there, kind of going back to Jill. I don't think you'd like to meet the person who thought they knew it all. If you think you knew it all, how boring of a life would that be going forward, whether it's in work or home or this beautiful world? So I'll leave it with be curious.
Well, I think I'm going to sum it up with a quote from Shakespeare that everyone knows: to thine own self be true. At the end of the day, the person that we look at in the mirror, the person that we interact with the most, that's us. It's us. And I think, and I don't want to just going to be a little judgmental. I'm going to phrase it in a really happy way. What a wonderful life. A life well lived, right? An intentional life, a purpose-filled life, a curious life, an authentic life. And by the way, those are 4 of my 5 values. So I believe that is what brings joy to yourself and joy to others. And that's what it's about. It's about being able to show up authentically and be joy-filled. And again, my 5th value, if you're curious, is zeal. I do not expect everyone to be like me. I know, I always say I'm an acquired taste. I get it. Like I can be a bit much. And so it's not trying to become a mini whomever you're trying to emulate. It's really leaning into your best self. And that's what brings joy and happiness.
That is the perfect way to wrap this up. Just a few quick things before we go. Everything we talked about today, which today there were quite a few books mentioned, so that's fun for the show notes. We'll link to those in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. Jill is always up on LinkedIn, so she was keeping me up to speed, but now I've been so intrigued, I've actually been jumping on more often. But we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a message, share your thoughts, let us know what topics or guests you'd like to hear next on the show. A big thank you to our sponsor, Alacrity, a leading payments fintech helping credit unions compete with challenger banks and digital wallets. Check them out in the show notes as well. Give them a click. We really do appreciate their support. If you haven't already, subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We are everywhere you listen: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whichever one you choose. As I always mention, but today there will be quite a few new ones on it. A quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next best recommendation or read or listen can be on its way. And of course, a huge thank you to Tracie for joining us today, and also my super smart and beautiful co-host. This is so much fun to do this with you, my love, and all of you for tuning in. We appreciate you. Y'all rock. We are grateful for every single one of you. Be well, friends. Until next time.